join us, we'll let them in. But yeah, Name, if you want to, oh, you've already started the recording. Great. So I'm excited to turn it over to Rachel Armstrong from Farm Commons for the second of our Farm Commons workshops during the Regenerate conference. So thanks so much for joining us, Rachel and Taylor.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us. If anyone might be in the wrong session, I recommend sticking around. This is the right business structure, strategies for reducing legal risk and leveraging opportunity. I think you're going to like what we have for you today. Good stuff about LLCs, corporations, what they can and can't do, how you can use them best. But before we get into it, well, who's this person standing in front of you? That's me. I'm Rachel Armstrong. I am joining you from northern Minnesota. This is where I grew up. My background is entirely in farm and food system development. It's what I've always known, that those are in fact my ancestors. Farming on land that was, cut over by the people before them because this was logging country. And then before them was stewarded by the native Ojibwe people here in the region. The land came into the ownership of my family. I wouldn't say they were thrilled about farming. It was a bit more reluctant. That was until I came around and I was like, hey, farming is cool. What are we going to do? How are we going to make farming better? So loving agriculture, I had to find some sort of niche. How was I going to be of use to the farming community? And looking around, I realized, gosh, we could use some help with legal education. This is something, maybe I could do. So I went ahead and did that. I went to law school. I attended the University of Denver, Strom College of Law. I looked at these mountains every day as I rode the bus to law school. That was 3 years of law school and 3 years to figure out what Farm Commons was going to do to help my community get access to legal information. Farm Commons is what has resulted. I'm the executive director today. I'm back in Minnesota. These are my little munchkins. I have 3 kiddos. We serve farmers and ranchers nationwide. And that's a really fun thing for us. And a lot of folks say, well, how can you do that? State law. Yeah, there are definitely state laws, and those are very important. But there's also a huge body of federal law that affects farmers everywhere. There's also a lot of state and local laws that affect farmers. What we do is we really empower farmers and ranchers. Empowerment is about knowing where to get information, knowing when you have a problem, and knowing action steps to initiate resolution. So it isn't always about knowing specific state laws or even local or regional laws. So I think you can take a lot of comfort in that in terms of the action steps that I will offer you today and the things that you will learn. You don't have to go to law school. You don't have to become an attorney. There is a lot that you can do for yourself with some good knowledge points and action points. So that's me. Now I want to hear about you. Your expertise and your background are really relevant to today's discussion. We're going to have a few breaks where we are looking to you to comment. What are you learning? What's interesting? We're even going to have a breakout session where you are going to gather with a few peers to talk about what you see as important in a certain scenario. So we should get some introductions going. Here's what I would like you to do. Can you type into the chat box your name, your affiliation, if you have one, like your farm name, and what you're an expert in? Everybody is an expert in something. So I want you to own that. What are you good at? It can be professional, it can be personal. Here's an example. I'm Rachel Armstrong from Farm Commons, and I'm an expert in getting 3 preschoolers dressed for winter and out the door to play in 15 minutes or less on a good day. Some days that might take an entire half hour, but oh well. So get to work putting your statement into the chat box. I'm going to take a few more minutes to say a little bit more about legal education, and then Taylor is going to read some of your introductions. And Taylor, the first thing I'll ask you to do is introduce yourself. So wait till we get to that slide, and then introduce yourself and read us a sample of what has come in over the chat box. Before we get there, again, here's our mission statement. We empower farmers and ranchers to understand and solve their business law issues within an ecosystem of support. That ecosystem of support includes attorneys. It includes nonprofit professionals, farm educators, extension staff. All of us play an important role in helping to resolve legal risk. What we do to carry out that mission is create and deliver farm law education materials and workshops, just like this. We also train farmers to lead solutions in their own community. In our session today, you are already learning to use the chat box because we're asking you to type in your introduction. Oh, wait, I don't think we have the Q&A feature. So let me turn that over to someone else. For questions, folks should put those in the chat box. Is that what we want?
Yep.
Awesome. Taylor will mute and unmute you in the couple of times here when we ask you to raise your hand if you want to contribute to the discussion. So look for that. We always have a fallback. If it doesn't work, we'll go with the chat box. All right, Taylor, tell us about yourself, and then do we have any introductions coming in?
Hi, Rachel. Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Taylor. I'm a coordinator with Farm Commons. I handle legal research, our volunteer program, and do some office management. I'm in Hawaii, and my background is more in environmental law. I went to law school in Vermont, but it's always fun to learn more about the farming community. So let's learn a little bit more. Okay, we have Molly, who used to be an expert in ag mortgage lending, appraisals, knitting, and getting 3 kids through college. She is president of the Southwest Grazing Incorporated. Hello, Molly. Let's see, we've got Rebecca, director of the Niche Meat Processor Assistance Network. She says she's an expert in understanding the complexities of local and regional meat processing. Very interesting. And then let's see, we've got Roby Cook, Holistic Management Certified Educator Trainee, becoming more of an expert at applying HM framework to many situations. Also knowledgeable about operating a small nonprofit in California. Wonderful. And then I'll do one more. Bren Scott, Quiver NAP apprentice for Badger Creek in the mountains of South Central Colorado. They're an expert in being endlessly curious, especially about regenerative ag. Very cool. Nice to meet everyone.
Awesome. Being endlessly curious is exactly the kind of skills one needs to be successful in legal resilience, actually, too. A lot of folks don't think about that, but it is true. Here's something else folks don't think about. Legal education, what you are doing right here, can reduce risk. It can build stronger communities, and I'm here to tell you, it can also create joy. Yes, joy. You think you're here to learn boring rules. We have some of those, but we also have opportunity. We have opportunity here to build the kind of world that we want, to shape it, define it, and even to make it legally enforceable. There's a lot of potential with what you are about to learn today. And it isn't just about avoiding bad things. This is about understanding our neighbors better, working more cohesively with our partners. It is about building a new agricultural system. And with that comes joy. You know, you all farm and ranch, raise animals, grow crops because you love it deeply. You wouldn't do it if you didn't. And that joy is really why you're here. Legal education can support that. And I want to commend you for taking this step to delve into these issues a little more closely. We're going to get right to the content, but I do have one more thing I want to learn about, y'all. I want to get an idea of your general background so that I can make sure I'm speaking to your experience. So we have a couple of polls here that Taylor is going to help us run. Those, if you have not been part of a poll through Zoom before, it's going to pop up in front of you and then you click the answer. I will move mine out of the way. You should see it in front of you. Are you a farm or ranch business owner, an advisor or another, such as an agricultural educator, a nonprofit staff person, a lender, insurance agent, or business consultant? Okay, the second question you're going to see in front of you. How long have you been in the role that you selected? We broke that out into 3 general categories. In our third question, you're going to find at the bottom, have you formed a business entity before? An LLC, a corporation, even a nonprofit? If you have been a part of that process, select yes. If that's totally foreign to you, you haven't done any of that, select no. And of course, maybe you're not sure, maybe it was a business entity. Select sure. We're going to give that a minute or two, and then Taylor will summarize for us.
All right, we're at 76% voted so far. I'll give it a few more moments just in case anyone wants to add any other answers. All right, let's see. Looks like 77% of you are farmers or ranchers, 38% educator or nonprofit, 15% landowner, and then the rest seems to be farmer rancher support professional. Very nice. All right, let's see. 46% of you have been in the role for 10 or more years. And then it's 0 to 4, and then 5 to 9 with 23%. Wow, that's most of you. And then 62% have said yes, that they have formed a business entity. 38% is no, and nobody said unsure. So at least we have that. But all right, thanks everyone.
Awesome. That is very helpful. Generally speaking, we have an informed or an experienced audience that knows a little something about forming a business entity. I am glad. Whether you have no experience or you have lots, I think that you'll still find things you can gain from today's webinar. There are a lot of misconceptions that go along with forming a business structure. So I'm hopeful that we can dispel any of those myths and help you make sure that you're getting the most out of what you may have already done, formed an LLC or a corporation. Let's do it. Let's get into it. Let's keep in mind that we could be, pigs wallowing by the water trough soon once we get to that joy at the end. First, I've got some action steps for you. I want to be incredibly clear about exactly what you should be doing to minimize legal risk when it comes to business structures. The first thing I want you to internalize, one of the single best ways that you can reduce risk is to write an organizing document. Write an organizing document that creates solutions for you, your partners, and your farm's needs, circumstances, and expectations. We're going to go into detail about what that really means and why it is so important, but I want you to really focus on that as your single most important risk-reducing action step. Second, and it is second, is to consider forming an LLC or an S corporation if you are willing to deal with some additional paperwork and you want protection from your personal assets or you want tax savings when you make more in personal income from farming than the average farmer. If and when you meet these 3 basic criteria, you're tolerant of some additional paperwork, you want protection for your personal assets, or you want tax savings, an LLC or an S corporation is a good idea, and you should consider forming one. So with that in mind, that's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to be going into the details, the ins and outs. Let's focus on that first primary action step right away. Write an organizing document. Okay, I'm going to tell you this story. We've got a couple, Jack and Jill. They want to raise some beef together. Jack's going to do some animal care. Jill's going to do some marketing. They're on family land. It's Jill's family land. Sounds typical, right? A lot of good farm beginnings start this way. What could possibly go wrong? Think about all the other groups of friends that you have known, the spouses, the boyfriends, girlfriends, that go into business together. What's going to go right? What's going to go wrong about Jack and Jill getting together to raise beef? Please use the comment box or otherwise you can indicate to be unmuted. And while you're thinking of it, I'm gonna start you off. Number one thing I see, Jack and Jill are going to disagree about money. They are going to disagree about exactly how much to invest in machinery and what's really going to be worth it in the long run in terms of, you know, acquiring assets and machinery for the farm. So that's a big one. What are some of the other big things that you see? I like that one. They might fall down the hill. Yes. What else are we seeing there, Taylor?
Molly said they could split up. They could have very different expectations. Very true.
Yes.
Who they could be figuring out who are the decision makers and who can veto those decisions. If it's Jill's family's land, they can disagree on land use. Oh, here's a big one: financial disputes. One party wants to stop ranching and or leave the farm.
Right. Absolutely. These are all the things that can and do happen every day. We see it. Married couples divorce. You know, the land gets passed to a new owner. The parents pass away and leave the land to all the kids. People decide they want to go back to school. They have children, and then, you know, childcare and other expectations. Our financial condition changes. We're trying to save for college and we want to be more profitable. So many things come up, even just down to, you know, agreeing on processing dates or land management, you know, tactics or things like that. Now, I run this exercise for a slightly strange reason. I want you to pay attention to what we didn't say. No one went right to that chat box and said, Jack and Jill are doomed because they might choose to form an LLC over an S corporation. Or their downfall is going to be remaining as a general partnership and not forming an LLC. I want to be clear that there are virtues to an LLC or a corporation, but we don't want to overstate them. Most farm businesses do not fail because they chose the wrong business structure. They fail because of the D's: disputes, death, disability, divorce. That's why farm businesses fail. So if we're talking about resilience, if our real goal is to ensure that our farms stick around, are profitable, are able to live out their values for the land, then we're going to deal with the things that actually take the farm business down. So let's spend a moment thinking about how business structures actually address these real problems. Imagine a world where all the Jacks and Jills and all the farm and ranch businesses out there talked about these things. What does each partner need to contribute to the business? Is it money? Is it labor? And when? How are we compensated for our involvement? And when? Is that compensation different depending on if we're putting in money or labor? How are we valuing labor especially? Who makes important decisions about big issues like buying property or going into debt or acquiring equipment? What happens when someone wants to leave the business? How do we handle disputes? Despite everything that we might do to cooperate, to be good friends and relatives and love each other, we'll still eventually disagree about something. Do we have a process? Are we anticipating those processes by doing things like annual budgeting, financial procedures, or what about our obligations to the government? These things are issues of a business structure. Usually the answers to these questions are wrapped up in a little something called the governance document. The governance document goes by different names, and we'll get to that, but what it does is it answers those extremely important questions. So what I want to impress upon you is the single most important step that farmers and ranchers can make towards resiliency is to write this organizing document, also called governance document. I'm never quite sure which one of those sounds better, more approachable. It's just a document that answers those basic questions. How do we get in? How do we get out? I have a little video that I am going to show you here to put that in somebody else's words. You've heard from me. Let's hear it. Oh, I think I might have. One moment, bear with me. I forgot to select the share computer sound option.
We thought first and foremost that remaining friends on the beginning and the end of the company, if an end comes, was more important than anything.
Pasture Perfect Poultry got started because there was a couple of us raising chickens on a smaller scale and selling them locally.
Small farm producers do not have the support services that the traditional commodity-based farms have.
We thought working together, we could come up with some solutions that we weren't able to access as individuals.
When farmers are starting a business, they have many choices in selecting a business entity. And the business entity is really just this legal code word for how the law understands this business. An LLC is one option that farmers have when choosing a business entity, either for themselves individually or for a partnership. An LLC is governed by the operating agreement. The operating agreement is a document. It's not filed with the state, it's simply signed between all the members of the LLC, and then it pretty much goes in a drawer. But the operating agreement is a very important resource.
So Jason came back to us with the contract. We were pretty impressed. There was everything in there, all the sort of production logistics, all the way down to what happens when one of us dies.
The operating agreement has been great for us because not only does it lay out production standards and daily operations of the company, but then it lays out a path how we grow, how we add additional partners.
The partnership for Pasture Perfect Poultry really goes into a lot of detail. Many farms are going to do fine having an operating agreement or other organizing document that lays out more fundamental aspects of the way the owners work together. How do you get into the business? How do you get out? How do you share profits? How do you divide responsibilities?
I think having all this from the start, it really helped sort of be proactive against problem solving instead of being reactive when problems came up. Having the operating agreement has definitely helped preserve our friendship. I couldn't imagine working with a better group of guys.
All right. So that is, that's what we're really talking about. How do you stay friends? How do you keep the relationships that are so valuable to you and preserve the reasons why you farm in your community? Let's do this. Okay, there we go. That was the first time I successfully shared a video. Feeling kind of proud. Okay, moving on. Let's talk about what these documents are named. If you have an LLC, this thing has a title on the top that says operating agreement. If you have a corporation, that says bylaws or shareholder agreement. And if you have a partnership, it's called a partnership agreement. They all go by different names. They all have the same content to them. Really, resiliency comes from these relationships. It comes from sitting down and talking through these plans. But a lot of times, of course, folks don't do that. It can be really difficult. I actually think this is the most hard when it's the people to whom you are the closest. If this person is your mother or your sister or your spouse, it can be a lot harder actually to have these kinds of questions. You know, we go into farming with a spouse because we assume that that's what we're going to do forever. It's really hard to open that question of what if we don't? What if I change my mind? So because this is so common, this happens all the time, if you don't have a plan, the state has one for you. The state is there to back you up with some rules that they are going to put in place to help you figure out your affairs when you didn't do that for yourself. So let's talk a little bit more about that, simply because this is so inevitable. According to most state defaults, decisions in an LLC or a corporation or a partnership are made on the basis of majority rule, and that is determined by the share of ownership. Share of ownership is generally determined by how much you have invested in the business. So a person who puts in more financially, usually, gets a greater share, therefore has more decision-making authority over the operation. That might be fine, but is it fine? Let's say that we go back to our Jack and Jill relationship. Jack, Jill, and John go into business together. One is doing beef production, one is doing pasture poultry, one is doing vegetables, and they're going to create, like a CSA or something like that. Let's say that Jack and John get together and they want to buy a new tractor. They don't want to ask Jill. She doesn't, she's not going to want to. She's more fiscally conservative. Jack and John decide, hey, between the two of us, we got a majority here because we're 2 out of 3. And since we all contributed equally, we have a financial majority as well. Let's get the tractor. Jill gets upset. She tends to handle the finances and do the business projections, and she knows that they can't afford that tractor. Let's say then that the entity defaults on the loan, the LLC defaults, and everyone is arguing over money, and Jill comes in and says, look, this action was never authorized because I wasn't consulted. Well, the law would say, well, that action was authorized. But is the business going to fail anyways? Yeah, things are not going well. Even if financially they can sustain that purchase, we have a real problem. We have a dispute, and this business is probably not going to survive that. Even if Jill doesn't have legal recourse, we still have a sad situation. We have a rupture, and so this farm business is at risk. So relying on state defaults doesn't necessarily serve us as a community. It doesn't help our farm businesses become stronger, and it doesn't always lead to decisions that are just or fair or what an objective person might decide should happen in this kind of a situation. So what you need to know is that, yes, there is a body of law that's there for you when you didn't come to these decisions yourself, but by relying on those, you're not necessarily contributing to your resiliency. At this point, you might be saying, boy, Rachel, we are off on an interesting track here with partnerships. I don't have a partner. Does any of this apply to me? Why should I write any one of these documents, the operating agreement, the bylaws, if I don't have a partner? There's another reason. I've talked about the practical, goal-based reasons of running a successful farm and being able to live out your values on the land. But there is actually another reason, and that's about your core legal legitimacy. If you are to form an LLC or a corporation, it is very valuable to set out an operating agreement or bylaws. It's also very easy because all you have to do is agree with yourself about the content of that. What are you going to put into the business? How are you going to get out if you want out? It's super easy and really enjoyable, and you could probably eat chocolate cake while you're writing one of those documents. Why you would do it is because it's a signal to the court that you are taking yourself seriously. That when you formed that LLC or that corporation and you drafted those bylaws, you were recognizing the distinction between you and the business. You sat down and wrote this document that outlined how you were going to operate within your business. That morsel of legal legitimacy can work for you in the end. If someone comes after you to try to get at your assets, your personal assets, which we will get to later, this distills, it bequeaths you with a little bit more legal legitimacy than if you didn't have one of these documents. So that's another good reason to draft your partnership agreement, operating agreement, or bylaws, even if you're already on the same page with your partner and this isn't hard. Do it to gain the legal legitimacy. Okay, so I think I've convinced you that resiliency is in your relationships and that it's really important that we talk about hard questions. Let's look at a few of those specifics, and we are going to break out into small groups and practice this. In the slide, this was given to you as a handout that was sent ahead. So if you have that email on hand or you printed out those handouts, take a look. Otherwise, just look at your screen. On the right-hand side, you're going to see those essential questions. How will business partners enter or exit the farm business? What does each partner need to contribute? How are we compensated? Who makes important decisions about big issues? What happens if someone wants to leave? How do we handle disputes? And how are we handling budgeting, financial procedures, or governmental obligations? What's going to happen next is we're going to break you into small groups. Here's what I want you to talk about. Which issue do you think is most important for Jack and Jill and John or other farmers to discuss? At the same time, if you have a business partner, which of these is most important for you to discuss? You can tackle either or both of those questions, whatever feels right to you and those in your group. So we're going to send you into breakout rooms, and I want you to just dive right in, pipe up and answer one of these questions and say which of those issues you think is the most important. All right, are we ready to make those breakout groups happen?
Almost.
Okay. And for those on the line, this is a little bit like magic. All of a sudden you end up in one of these rooms. We'll tell you, you have 5 minutes, and you'll see a timer pop up that tells you when you have 1 minute left. You might not have a chance to go all the way around the room, but I hope it's still valuable, and we're going to reflect together when we come back.
Seconds away. All right, I'm ready to send everybody. Ready for the magic?
Awesome.
Welcome back, everybody. There they come. You're muted, Rachel.
I do love the magic. And I will get us back on track with some screen sharing here. All right. It looks like everybody is coming back to the main room. Thank you all for participating in that discussion. I hope you had enough time to hear from a few folks. Now, I would love to take a few comments, and I am going to call on our facilitators to give some highlights, and I will start. We had folks agree generally that discussing contributions was really important, especially when folks are contributing, substantial assets or maybe taking out a mortgage or using savings. We also thought that who makes decisions, especially in an intergenerational context, was really important. So let's see, Leah or Taylor, would you like to go next to comment on what your group shared?
Sure, I can go next. We wish we had more time, but I think the thing that stood out to our group was figuring out roles and decision making kind of covers some of the other questions and topics.
Awesome. Taylor, how about you guys?
Actually, my cat knocked something over, so I had to pop out real fast. But
Nice.
Molly and Ashley and everyone had a good chat. But Ashley, you had some interesting feedback. Do you mind saying something real fast? I want to make sure we talk. I can unmute her. Okay, thank you.
Yep. I am not a rancher or farmer, though I'd love to be, but I did recently create an LLC. I'm an environmental consultant, and I never thought of, I certainly have a business plan, of course, but I actually never considered writing up a an agreement to myself. Just obviously I went through that in my mind, like what the whole point of this was and why I'm doing it, and what I would be responsible and how to separate my life from my work. But the idea of writing it up for legal reasons, just to make it more legitimate, was an interesting point that you made, Rachel.
Cool.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Leah or Nama, if you want to summarize.
Or was that Alexis that was in one of the other rooms?
Or is it Alexis?
Yeah, it was me.
Oh, great.
Hi, Rachel.
Hey, Alexis.
So we introduced ourselves, and then we got talking about why we were actually taking this training. And one of the things that came out, especially from my experience doing the training with you, Rachel, earlier in the year, and was just how easy it is to avoid these questions and do this work, even though it's just as important to what we're doing as taking care of the animals, or doing all the stuff we do outside on our businesses. And so just kind of getting over that uncomfortableness of having those conversations, I think, is really important for all of us. And knowing that I've been running an operation for like 10 years, and doing the training with you was the first time I actually had to sit down and go through this. And I think we just kind of talked about the importance of that, and how it's something it's really easy to avoid.
Thanks, Alexis.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Well, good deal. So wrapping up our reflection, I want you to know that this is the hard stuff. This isn't, I didn't give you the easy stuff right away. I went right to the most difficult work that you can do when it comes to business structures. These are the challenging things. These are things that have to do with family, heritage, roles, responsibilities, money, values, religion, who knows, all the heavy stuff. All the heavy stuff gets pulled in right here. If you can do this, you have won. You are doing the big stuff. So I don't want to make light of this. It is really challenging. And when you go down this path, you might be on this path for a long time. It could take 2 years, 3 years, 5 years to get this figured out. But I assure you, the moment you begin that process, the stronger you are already, because you've opened up that avenue of conversation, you've had that dialogue, and you are on your way. Sometimes that first step is the hardest one to take. So if you're feeling that heaviness right now, that's totally understandable, and you can move forward. We had a great question come up in my breakout that I wanted to handle right now. Rebecca asked, how specific do you really get when you're drafting these things? Would you say something like, we have a weekly team meeting? And, do you really go for majority? But like, if you have 2 people, you have no majority. So how do you do that? These are perfect questions. We want to think about the operating agreement from a legal perspective should be quite stable. This should be something that's going to last you, at least a year. Kind of think about a 3-year time frame. I recommend reviewing it annually, but put the stuff in there that's not going to change that much. What you have on the side is your policies. You can incorporate your policies by saying, well, look, we are going to communicate in accordance with our meeting policy. So that goes into the operating agreement. We meet in accordance with the communication policy. The communication policy is a separate document that you can change anytime you want. As the seasons or production change, you can say, well, look, during lambing season, we are going to be meeting, every week. Or when we're active with sales, we're going to meet to discuss, financials every other week. You come up with a meeting schedule that works for you in a policy. Similar with anything else that's going to change on a pretty regular basis, put it in a policy. Then you can change it. And also set aside some time every year to look at that operating agreement and say, is this still working for us? We still like this? Do we want to make changes? What do you do when you have 2 people? Majority doesn't really work. Well, you have 2 strategies. Number one, you're going to have to work for consensus on some issues because you don't really want to overrule each other. So creating strategies that help you find consensus can be really good. This is a whole body of knowledge out there. So Google is your friend. You can pick up techniques about how do you strategize to obtain consensus. in a group. So think about looking at some of that. The other way you can go is no consensus, just divide responsibilities. You take a step back and say, where am I willing to give up control? Where do I trust my partner? And what is going to help me have that process? What's going to help me build that trust or define realms in which they really do have control and don't have to tell me about it? Other things you can do is work with your budget and the budgeting approval procedures and obligations to stay within a budget to help support that trust that you've created. So those are two different strategies to adopt. You can certainly write that kind of stuff into policies if you're really good like that, or you can, you don't have to write in there, we will use consensus-based strategies to come to agreement, but you can. So some of how complex you want that to be is going to depend on the type of people you are. Are you really detail oriented, or do you work better when you just set up systems to stay in touch? So Rebecca, let me know in the chat box if that doesn't answer your question. Otherwise, I want you to know about some resources that we have to help you. We have a document full of questions to ask when you are writing your organizing or governance document. It is in a little something called, and I'm holding this up to the camera, which I know is minuscule, Farmer's Guide to Business Structures. I have a print copy here that you can buy from SARE, Sustainable Ag Research and Education, or you can download it for free from our website. Check the checklist, check the detailed annotated operating agreements that tell you in detail how you might write one of these documents and how it applies to the farm. So we show you the legal language in blue, then we annotate it with this little person that supposedly looked like me 7 years ago, kind of like that video, telling you what it meant. So download those, take a look. Did we get any more questions, Taylor, while I've been yapping on here?
You actually already answered it. Wendy asked, are there templates for the different documents? She specified communication policy. Do you have any thoughts on that one, or just specifically what you mentioned before?
I don't have a template communication policy. That's a really good, we'll put that on the list. Yeah, to generate. We do have a dispute resolution clause in here, which is another important thing to think about. You might always, there's always the potential for an intractable disagreement, and you don't want that to, cause a self-destruct. So some dispute resolution procedures can look like partner A recommends one person, partner B recommends a second person. Those two people get together and recommend a third person, and we have a 3-person team. We sit down with this 3-person team and tell them our tale of woe. This is what we can't agree on, and here's why in the background. And we ask them to propose a resolution to us. It's just a proposal. We're not like bound to it, but it's a strategy to help take some of the emotion out of the problem and get to a more objective perspective on how to move forward. So, so you'll find some tidbits, but not necessarily the communication policy. Okay. Moving on a little bit, we are going to talk about choosing a business structure. This is what you thought you'd probably gain from this webinar, and I hope I won't disappoint. We're going to go through sole proprietorships and partnerships, corporations, LLCs. I've got something on benefit corporations and a little bit on nonprofits as well. Okay. We also have a flow chart. It is in your handout packet. 100% go back to that flow chart. It is more robust and thorough than you're going to get here because time. And honestly, I wanted you to have that in print because it's really important to me that we emphasize this first action point about governance and organization. This is relatively easy for you to work through on your own time, to the extent I'm not covering all the details. Okay, choosing a business structure. The first question we want to ask to compare and contrast our options is, does it protect your personal assets from your business liabilities? Yeah, you see that right in front of you. We got to know. No, sole proprietorships and partnerships do not protect personal assets from business liabilities. Your LLC does, your corporation does, Your benefit corporation and your nonprofit, in most circumstances, do. So this is a major downside to your sole proprietorship or your partnership. Your personal assets are exposed. What are personal assets? Well, for farmers and ranchers, sometimes these can be hard to come by. They are your personal vehicle and the home in which you live. But most of the assets that farmers and ranchers have are things like land, equipment, infrastructure that is related to the agricultural operation. Those are generally not business or personal assets. Sometimes, yes, the land can be, but not always. You'd like it to be. But oftentimes that really valuable stuff is a business asset, not a personal asset. So we'll get to why that's important in a moment. But I have a caveat. Yes, LLCs, corporations, nonprofits, and benefit corporations do protect personal assets mostly, but it's not a guarantee. You have to do additional things to make sure that that personal asset protection is there for you. One of the key things that you have to do is separate your personal and business finances. This means you need to keep a separate bank account. If you form an LLC and you continue to run all of your personal and business affairs through that bank account, that one bank account, you're actually degrading this personal asset protection. The same thing happens if you don't keep up with your annual obligations to the state and federal government, like filing your taxes. And it doesn't work if you extended a personal guarantee. Usually when you go to get a loan and you try to make that loan, get that loan in the name of your LLC, the bank is going to say, yeah, no, we know that we'd be limited to much fewer assets. We want all your personal assets too, if you default. And so they will make you sign a personal guarantee, and then you are personally liable. So you just have to know these things. And it's not hard to run two bank accounts necessarily or to fulfill your annual obligations, but you got to keep on it. And for that reason, not every farmer wants an LLC or corporation. Some folks, some ranchers are going to be like, I have always purchased my snacks and my work gloves on the same checking account, and I'm not going to change. That's fine. Then maybe an LLC or corporation isn't the right choice necessarily. So if you want that personal asset, we recommend forming one of these and following through. But what I also want to make sure you know is that none of these business structures protects business assets from business liabilities. If there's a liability against the business, then they will come for the business assets. So that can be incredibly valuable stuff on a farm and a ranch. The only way you can protect your business assets from business liabilities is through insurance. Insurance is there for you to step in and defend you and provide some money to pay out on that liability. Now, obviously, insurance you can't insure against debt default or, fines for, non-compliance with laws or things like that. But for things like a food safety liability or a slip and fall injury that's related to your farm, that's where you really want to have business insurance in place to protect your business assets. The bottom line is that an LLC or corporation, including benefit corporation or a nonprofit, is not a substitute for insurance. So once you've got that, then most farmers and ranchers think that the benefits of a limited liability entity, including LLC or corporation, they think it's worth it. Not everybody, there's some folks who are like, look, partnership or sole proprietorship is still fine with me. I'm comfortable. But most folks are like, okay, I'll do it. It's cheap, right? It is cheap. So then we come to the question of which one do we choose? Before I jump down that rabbit hole, Taylor, we got any questions?
None so far.
Okay. So which one do we choose? Most folks focus on the LLC or the corporation. So I'm going to start with the distinction between those two, just to cut down on options a little bit. We'll get to the nonprofit later. Most folks have this idea that LLCs are more flexible than corporations. Is it true? It's technically true. It's true because LLCs can have more than 100 members. LLCs can also have members that are other LLCs or corporations, whereas your corporation generally has to have an actual real person be a member. And operating agreements and officers are often not required. Sometimes they are, but there's sometimes some greater latitude there. This is great, but it's not that useful for most farms. Most farm and ranch businesses are not going to have more than 100 members. And they're also not looking to take on owners that are other entities. It's usually real people. And for the most part, they're convinced that an operating agreement is a good idea. So they're gonna draft one of these anyways. That's a strategy I highly recommend, by the way. Sure, there can be some perks to not having to nominate officers, but again, don't jump in that pool right away. Having an officer can be really helpful as part of your strategy to stay on top of budgeting. You know, you appoint a treasurer so that you know that somebody is drafting the first round of next year's budget. You have a president because you want to make sure that somebody is going to remember to call the meeting and somebody's going to take notes. So those are just really good things to do. They establish your legitimacy. They prove that you acknowledge that you have an LLC or a corporation and you are trying to act in accordance. You know, it's like sitting down and writing the operating agreement for only yourself. It's easy. And it's weird and formulaic, but it's, you know, it's a charade. We're telling the state, look, I respect the fact that I went to you and formed a corporation, an LLC. I'm following through. So these are fine, but they're often not going to help you decide between a corporation or an LLC.
So Rachel,
oh yeah.
No, sorry. Someone's wondering, do officers have to be paid?
No, on this scale, no, they're not paid.
Okay, and then
if you want, but
right. They're also asking which corporation structure would allow you to take on non-voting investors.
Non-voting investors. Usually folks are gonna, well, that's not a deal-breaking decision. You can structure that in to your S corporation, your C corporation, your LLC. These are pretty flexible and you could make that happen.
Okay, great, thanks.
Most farm and ranch businesses are going to come down on taxes, fees, and convenience to try to make this decision. The legal legitimacy is the same. You know, the points of flexibility aren't compelling. So it's like, how much does it cost? Let's compare. In Montana, well, I guess this isn't going to help that much. Same formation fees and annual fees from LLC to corporation. California, you're going to pay more. So that's why I wanted to put California up here. You're going to pay more for a corporation, but it's not significant. You know, we got a good 25, 30 bucks. So not a big distinction. I also put up California because I want you to know about this annual franchise tax. This is a case in large states like California, New York, where when you form an LLC or corporation, you are incurring an additional tax obligation for the privilege of having formed this. This is a motivating factor to some farm and ranchers not to form an LLC or a corporation because there's these additional costs to it. Almost all states have these formation fees and annual fees, but really only the big ones have the additional, what's often called a franchise tax. It can go by other names. So look out for that if you're in California. Oregon. This is another example here where our fees are, you know, higher than Montana, but they're still not high. The formation and annual fees are not different between LLC or corporation, but look here, C corporations pay a corporation excise tax. LLCs do not. So if you're in Oregon, it's like, LLC is looking more attractive. You're probably not going to be a C corporation, but you know, if you want to avoid that possibility entirely, hey, why not form an LLC? So to get into more detail on this, you're normally going to have to talk with your tax preparer or accountant. These factors really depend on the state you're in, how much profit you are generating, factors like that. You might not work with an accounting professional. And I have to warn you that, you can do this research yourself. You can make good educated decisions, but getting access to good accounting education can be challenging. There are some courses that are out there that great people offer on accounting for farm businesses, farm and ranch businesses. 100% try to find one of those courses and do that. It's a fabulous investment. And you can also see that as a good accompaniment to working with a professional so that you understand, their world, you understand why they're asking you certain questions, and you can be a good partner to them. So sometimes at Farm Commons, we get frustrated because we have to tell people, talk with your tax accountant, talk with your tax preparer or your accountant, because often these issues are just not legal and they change every year depending on tax laws and, stimulus packages and all kinds of things, especially in these coronavirus pandemic times, that are going to change things for you. You also need a more dynamic dialogue about some of these issues, that we'll get to later on. So in 5 minutes, I'm going to ask you to contribute your own knowledge and expertise to the conversation. How did you find an excellent accountant or tax preparer, if you have? What do you pay for accounting and tax prep, and is that worth it to you? What tips do you have for working with accounting and tax prep professionals? So type into the chat box, also indicate if you would like to be unmuted. We would love to hear from you on these points. I got a few more things to say before we get there. Again, the choice of a limited liability entity is rarely the difference between success and failure. So don't stress out about this. Think of this as another step in your journey to understand how the government sees your business, just as part of your accounting and tax prep. But wait, there's one more thing. A tax advantage. Isn't there a tax advantage to forming an S corporation? So we got some stuff to unpack here. So bear with me, we're gonna get there. Corporations come in two flavors, the S flavor and the C flavor. S stands for small business. Pretty much universally, your farm and your ranch business that would attend this type of a webinar is going to be a small business and is going to want to be an S corporation. An S corporation is not a thing that you go to your state to form. The state, well, that's just a corporation. S and C is a tax status. So, the state of California thinks you're a corporation. The IRS thinks you're an S or a C corporation. They created S corporations to give small businesses an opportunity to avoid being taxed. That's not what's as important right now for you to understand. What you need to understand is that you can choose to be taxed under Subchapter S of the Federal Tax Code. You can choose to be an S corporation. But it's really confusing because you can choose that even if you're an LLC. An LLC or a corporation can elect to be taxed under Subchapter S of the Federal Tax Code. You would do this if you make more in personal income from farming than the average farmer in a similar position. I have a chart on the next slide to show you why. Let's say the average farmer makes $30 annually. Farmer May this year struck it rich. She made $40. If she is taxed under Subchapter S, she can have that extra $10 taxed as dividends instead of as income. the dividends tax rate is often lower than the income tax rate. Now, of course, that depends. It depends on tax law this year, and it also depends on what your income tax rate is. If your income tax rate is high, maybe because you have off-farm income or your spouse does, or you're very profitable, this dropping down to the dividends tax rate could cause more savings. But if you're already in a low tax bracket at the income tax level, you might not save that much going for the dividends approach. So again, it depends. The bottom line is that you have to be an LLC or a corporation to receive this, this benefit. So this is a motivation to form an LLC or a corporation and to move away from a sole proprietorship. Even if you're uncompelled by protection for your personal assets, you might want to do it so you can take advantage of some tax savings. So your action point is to know that when you are making income on par with your peers, consider filing under Subchapter S. Speak with your tax preparer for timelines, and of course, to understand the latest tax rates and how this is going to, render a savings for you. I can wait for someone to ask this question, or I can assume you will answer it. You will ask it. So I'm going to jump right in. Somebody right now is thinking, what does the average farmer make? What does the average rancher make? I am dodging this question. And I have thoroughly dodged it by suggesting $30. I'm not suggesting 30. I'm being farcical. I won't answer that question because I could end up legally liable for the answer. You, in consultation with your attorney, your accountant is going to be good enough, can answer that question yourself, because the answer does expose you to some tax liability. You're going to have to defend that answer. If the IRS comes calling and is like, you're telling me the average farmer makes $25,000? Really? What's your evidence? So the IRS could come calling for some evidence, and you and your accountant need to agree together about what you're going to offer if they do ask you about that. So come up with something that you think you can defend, and your accountant is in a great position to help point you to some of the evidence that your IRS auditor is going to look at to try to come up with this determination. You can pay an attorney for that, but they're just going to charge you more. So try with the accountant first. So let's hear from you. How did you find an accountant or tax prep person? What do you pay? Is it worth it? And do you have any tips? Taylor, do we got anything?
Not on those specific questions yet, but while we're waiting for people to maybe type in or raise their hands, are you okay with answering different questions?
Let's do it. Yep.
Okay. So someone is referencing the graph you showed, the S Corp versus, they're wondering, is a C Corp in this graph? How would that look and pair off with the others?
Yeah, a C Corp is not in here. You don't want a C Corp. A C Corp gets taxed on its income. An LLC and an S corporation do not get taxed on their income. You as a person get taxed on the income that you receive from the business because it goes onto your Form 1040. But the entity itself doesn't pay taxes on it.
Okay.
It's what they call double taxation. That's the phrase you'll hear, because a C corporation is taxed on its own profit and it's taxed when it's passed back to the shareholders. So don't form one of those unless you're talking to someone else and they say form it, because it's rare.
And then someone's asking, can you choose between these two or others year to year? Can you change your corporation or business entity?
Right. You can't flop back and forth every year. I believe, but don't quote me, you have 3 years. You have to remain one as the other for a period of 3 years before you can switch again. But those are the kind of rules that might change. So get the latest information from someone who can give you that.
Okay, great. We have a couple coming in. Let's see. Molly says they found one through word of mouth. Rebecca says they had a customer who was a bookkeeper, but we never worked with an accountant. That was our mistake.
Mhm.
Molly followed up with pay between 1,800 basic year and $3,800 year. We did conservation easement. Pam says a neighbor provided a name of an accountant that they used and liked. So referral. I love it because they answer my questions and file my taxes. And then that's it so far for the other questions, but let's see. Always a risk that I put my confidence in the accountant without me knowing the details. And then someone says that having a professional do your taxes is the best time-saving investment you'll ever make. Let's see if there's any
Great input.
hands raised. I don't think so far there are any.
Great input. I really appreciate that. And that echoes what we hear around the country. Referrals are a great way to go. Your customers can also be a good referral source to mine. Getting someone that understands farm businesses can be essential. There is the accountant out there that doesn't know that a Schedule F exists. You kind of want someone that understands that farms are unique and have their own rules. So if you're in a farming community, that's a little easier. If you're in an urban area, sometimes you run into problems getting someone skilled with farm businesses. So referrals are strong. I appreciate that some folks said, boy, is this worth it? Because we do hear that a lot from farmers around the country too. A real sense of relief when they are able to hand things over. But I also want to call out that some folks said, gosh, we were working with, I think it was Rebecca said, we were working with a bookkeeper, not an accountant. There is a difference, and bookkeepers are significantly cheaper, but they don't have the training and the up-to-date information on things like I've mentioned here, like tracking down what the average farmer might make, understanding how to position yourself over the long term for a Subchapter S or something like that. You're generally going to have to pay more for that expertise and go to someone who is more qualified to do accounting and tax prep stuff. Awesome. Keep those comments and suggestions rolling in. I have a few more things to cover. I think we are on a good time frame. Just to recap what's going to happen for the rest of our time together, I have some bonus content, little tidbits that I want you to know. Then we're going to spend a little bit of time reflecting on our action steps for building resilience, and then we will go to question and answer. I do have to run at the half hour. So if we don't get to all of your questions by that time, when I have to go pick up my kids at preschool, we're going to do an extra half hour tomorrow morning, my time. I think it's 11:30 your time is what I picked. We're going to gather in another Zoom meeting. We have that invitation for you. You can follow that link and bring any questions that we don't get to, or whatever you think of overnight. You have a chance to reflect on this and you have some extra questions. Talk with me again tomorrow, and I can answer them, show you more resources, that sort of thing. So that's what to expect for the rest of our time together. Here's a few more things. If you are left of the Mississippi and in the states of South Dakota, Oklahoma, or Kansas, be aware of what are called anti-corporate farming laws. Or if you move to one of these states or you move east of the Mississippi, several Midwestern states east of the Mississippi also have these laws. They limit the ability of LLCs and corporations to lease or own farmland. So that sounds a little odd if you're not from around here, but that is totally the way that they work. They are in place to prevent LLCs and corporations from managing farmland. And this comes from a belief that these entities don't have the best interests of the land and the community in mind, and should be restricted from controlling farmland, which is so essential to livelihoods and economies in the Midwestern states. That being said, there are exceptions large enough to drive a tractor through, especially if we're talking family owned. If you're all related, you're probably fine. The problem is if you're not all related. So then you have to start to look at these things. They're also a problem if you are creative and if you are, like, for example, a food co-op, a grocery store co-op that decides to buy farmland. That's kind of a problem in some Midwestern states. So take a look at our flow charts. We have them all in the back of our book. We've got the flow chart for each state, also available at our website in the e-copy of the book. Another question, nobody's asked this one yet, but it might be sneaking around the back of your mind. Wait, do I need 2 business structures? When should I have multiple of these? Great question. Generally, or legally speaking, you can do anything through a single LLC or corporation. You don't need multiple of these, usually, for a legal reason. However, for practical reasons, you might be motivated to form separate business structures. From a practical basis, you want to think about whether you have significantly increased risk in one venture or one area of your activity. Also consider whether you have a significantly higher asset value, business asset value in that area, a really expensive piece of equipment that you need for that. My common example, not super relevant in a lot of the West, but is an orchard that does cider. Cider is significantly more risky than a raw apple in terms of food safety, liability, those sorts of things. Cider also comes with a higher asset value. You got to refrigerate and press that cider, you got bottling, you've just got a lot more machinery. And the third factor is, do you have a legitimate division of operations? In cider, the answer is usually yes. Producing apples is just authentically different than making cider. Most people will do one or the other and not both, further proving that these are legitimately different operations. When each of these things are present, increased risk, higher asset value, and legitimate division, we often say, yeah, there's a benefit to forming a separate business structure. Why? We're going to reflect back on the core benefit that an LLC or a corporation provides. It limits business liabilities to business assets. So if the cider makes someone sick, that's business liability potentially, and they're limited to the cider operations assets to collect on that, not the apple production's assets. So we have at least preserved, all the infrastructure related to actually growing the apples. We might lose, if we don't have insurance, everything related to producing the cider. The third thing we often want to consider here is keeping the land in personal ownership. So all the land that underlies the orchard, we're probably going to want to hold in our personal name and not make it an asset of the LLC or the corporation. So you can see where that's going. That puts another layer of protection. If your insurance fails and they're still taking those assets, at least that one is still personal. Same with, the home, if it's on the farm property, personal vehicle, things like that. Another tidbit, some farmers are not compelled by the LLC and the corporation because they know that farm bankruptcy is there for them. They know that if everything goes south and they wind up with liabilities that they cannot pay back, that the process of farm bankruptcy is there to help them preserve their ability to maintain a life, to live somewhere, to have a vehicle to drive, and to resolve their debts. So there's nothing wrong with that strategy either. Farm bankruptcy is a viable option to relieve oneself of some debts and liabilities. Those of us with student loans know that, some things we will die with, some debts we will die with, but some of them can be discharged. Some bonus content on your nonprofits. Go through that flow chart if you're thinking about a nonprofit. But oftentimes the biggest barrier to forming a nonprofit as a farmer or ranch business is that you are not supposed to compete with for-profit entities. This is to avoid people forming nonprofits in order to undercut the market, you know, and some of us in the farming community have heard about this happening, where someone might come in with a nonprofit and start growing apples and then selling them at a cheaper price because they're using volunteers or because they don't have to make a profit to survive. Other folks at the farmers market get mad, they're undercutting, makes it harder for other for-profit businesses to survive. That is prohibited by the tax code that allows nonprofits, you know, their nonprofit tax status, their 501c3 status. You can avoid that, of course, by not undercutting. The other thing that you need to pay close attention to is whether you're fulfilling an exempt purpose. Being good to the environment is not an exempt purpose. You know, having a regenerative farm in and of itself is generally not enough. Most farms with a 501c3 status or ranch businesses with 501c3 are doing education. They are supposed to be exclusively devoted to education. So where that is the case and you're not undercutting and, you know, fulfilling your obligations to the IRS, a nonprofit is a viable option. We have a whole chapter on nonprofits. If your ears are perking up and you're like, that sounds like me, check it out. We need to go into some detail on those nonprofit tests and 501c3 classification. One more thing I want to talk to you about benefit corporations. These are popping up in states. You know, the more West Coast you're going to go, the more you're going to see this as an option. There's not a lot of legal distinction between your benefit style corporations and your regular corporations. The legal obligation is to file additional paperwork discussing your good works and how you are serving a social good. As long as you do that and you follow some other limitations, you're fine. Folks choose your benefit corporations because for marketing purposes, so that they can go out and say, we are doing good things. And there's a paper trail. You can follow the paper trail to prove that we're doing good things. If that's worth it to you, think about pursuing that. But it comes at that cost of additional paperwork. I have a couple more slides for you and we'll catch some questions and we will catch up tomorrow morning. So where's that joy? Didn't I say there'd be joy? Chances are good you have some awkward, hard, or frustrating conversations ahead of you. Maybe with a spouse, maybe you have to find an accountant. I'm here to tell you that it will be worth it. You are on a good path. Think about how you feel before you have those hard conversations. You're the ostrich, the head in the sand, you can't sleep at night, you know, nothing tastes right. Now think about that moment after you have that conversation. When it doesn't even matter how it went, you are still free. You are free of the trap of the fear of that conversation. It can be worth it to get to that point where you have initiated the conversation and you can move on. I also want you to know that when you do this, you're a part of something that is bigger than yourself. When you write an operating agreement that's true to your farm and that respects your values and why you are on the land, you are creating your own rules. You're playing by your own terms and you are defining the law and you're defining it for yourself. And if you ask the state or the court to step in and help you enforce that in your business, they'll be there for you. They're there to help you enforce the rules that you set for yourself. So get in the driver's seat, control what happens to your farm, and be the people who make solutions. It's good stuff. So what's your action step after thinking about our material today? I've got an action planner in your handout. You can take a look at it now or later. Go track that down. It's at the end. And really what it does is it just prompts you with a few things that you might be thinking about. Like, gosh, I should set up a meeting, maybe with a business partner. Maybe you want to go get that checklist from our website of questions you should think through with your partner. Maybe you want to start looking for a referral to an accountant. Think about that action step. And if you want to volunteer what you think you might do next, we would love to hear from you. Write that in the chat box or indicate you want to be unmuted. And then thank you. And 5 more minutes for questions.
All righty, let's see what we got here. We had a couple, a little bit from before. Rebecca is asking, how easy is it to switch from being a sole proprietorship to being an LLC?
I'm going to say that it is easy. You go to the state and you complete their paperwork, but it's better to hear from others. If someone else wants to confirm or deny that in the chat box, that will be really helpful. How easy was it for you? We know that a certain percentage of you have done this. In my experience, though, it's really easy. They want your money, and they want some fundamental information about who the owners are and how they track you down if something goes wrong. You can also find full details in Farmer's Guide to Business Structures. It's going to help you complete those articles of incorporation or articles of organization. I didn't go into that today because it's boring and you can just read about it, but it's there for you.
Okay, great. Let's see. Dylan asked something that's more California specific, so I don't know your thoughts on that, but it is, could you please explain the franchise tax in the case of California's LLC and corporations? So it's a little specific, so I don't know.
Now, technically, I should be opening up my memo, delightfully coordinated by Taylor, who gets me these memos for full details on the excise/franchise tax. I think it's franchise in California. Basically, it is a tax on you as a business. So although per the IRS, an S corporation and an LLC are not taxed as entities of themselves, states can play by their own rules. The state departments of revenue can tax those entities on their own. So there's this $800 minimum that I had on my slide is a very common standard in Illinois because of Chicago, New York because of New York City. Will have this just give us $800 a year. If I remember right, and don't quote me, I don't have the memo in front of me. Once you hit $250,000 in the state of California, it's going to go up from the $800 minimum, and then usually they're going to take a percentage of your revenue on top of that. You've got to talk with a tax preparer or accountant for all of those details, and that's a person that can really look at your profit and loss statements and your balance sheet and help you figure out what's this burden going to be for you and is it the right choice for you. It's definitely not a good role for an educational environment because we want to look at your numbers.
Sure. So this one stems kind of from when you mentioned having multiple businesses or having multiple businesses, but kind of operating under the same kind of umbrella. Leah had mentioned that folks who raise and process their own animals and sell the meat, that it can be common to have separate land animal management and then the meat business. So someone followed that up with, is it wise to put the land in an LLC when there are multiple owners with only one of the owners leasing it to run cattle?
What I can say to that is at some point we have diminishing returns from additional LLCs. At some point, the increased risk management is small in comparison to the increased burdens of administering another LLC.
Sure.
Another LLC requires another bank account, another tax filing, and if you're in a state with excise or franchise tax, another financial burden. So do you gain something from also putting the land that you would otherwise hold personally into another LLC? Sure, yes, you do gain some marginal additional protection, but you also have additional costs, and is that worth the additional expenses? Reasonable minds can disagree. To some farmers, 2 LLCs is enough and 3 is too much. To other farmers, the shred of a possibility of losing that piece of land is wholly unacceptable, and this is not too much to pay. The belt and suspenders, a belt, a suspenders, and then another pair of suspenders. So you decide where your risk is. Access to information like this can help you weigh that, but sometimes it comes down to your gut instinct.
Okay, great. And then we have one last one that I think would be quick, but which business structure would make it easiest to sell your farm business? Is there a special one?
There's no, selling a farm business is hard. LLCs and corporations can help you bundle your assets with your value in the marketplace, with your intangible value. It can help you bundle like your intangible and your tangible assets and sell them as one package. Okay. But oftentimes, if you don't have a lot of business, marketing value, that's not there, and it can complicate things. So that's an issue where you really need to talk to an attorney. So I apologize. I do have to go get my kids at this point. I have loved talking with you. Join me tomorrow. I know we're going to put the invitation in the chat box, and I will see you there. And so Leah and Taylor, I'm going to let you close it out from here, and I really appreciate talking with you all.
Thanks so much, Rachel.
Hi, everyone.
So yeah, I think Name just posted the Zoom link for tomorrow's Q&A with Rachel for anyone who wants to join. So yeah, it'll just be drop in, ask whatever other questions you have. And for the meeting tomorrow, you do need a passcode to enter. It's on Rachel's Zoom account. So just make sure you copy both the link and the passcode so that you can get in at 10:30 tomorrow.
And also to say that I'm going to send a follow-up email. So you'll have it on email in addition.
Thank you so much, Name. All right. Well, thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.